3 urban explorers entered the abandoned asylum just after midnight. They were inside for less than 40 minutes, long enough to walk the main corridors, long enough to film several treatment rooms, long enough to reach the East Wing before one of them insisted they leave. At the time, none of them could fully explain why. They said the building felt wrong, too quiet, too heavy, as if someone was standing nearby just out of sight. Back outside, they laughed it off, but when they reviewed the audio the next morning, the laughter stopped. At first, the recording captured nothing unusual, just footsteps, breathing, the sound of doors creaking open. Then, in the background, beneath the sound of one of them speaking, a voice appeared. Weak, female, barely audible. 2 words. "Help me." The explorers listened again, certain they had misheard it. But a few seconds later, the same voice returned, this time clearer, more desperate. "They're hurting me." The 3 men swore no woman had been inside that building with them. No one had spoken those words, and none of them heard the voice while they were inside. By the end of the day, the recording had been passed through several online forums dedicated to abandoned locations and paranormal evidence. Some claimed it was fake. Others said they had heard similar stories about the asylum before. Stories of voices in empty rooms, of crying behind locked doors, of patients who were said to have disappeared during the building's final years of operation. When the audio reached the private anomaly research unit, it was flagged immediately. Not because it sounded supernatural, but because the voice did not sound distorted. It sounded close, human, and terrified. Mercer listened to the recording 3 times in silence. Jones said nothing until the second phrase played again. "They're hurting me." Then she looked up and asked the only question that mattered. If nobody heard it live, who exactly was talking? The case was escalated within the hour. The asylum stood on the edge of a wooded hillside, several miles outside the nearest town. It had been closed for nearly 30 years. Most of the windows had been boarded up. The surrounding fence had collapsed in several places, and the long main building, blackened by age and weather, seemed to sink into the ground, like it was trying to disappear. Mercer and Jones arrived late that afternoon with copies of the original recording, 2 handheld audio recorders, a portable EM meter, and body cameras. The building had no electricity, no running water, no active security. Officially, it was abandoned. Unofficially, locals still avoided it. The pair met the 3 explorers in a gravel turnout just beyond the tree line. All 3 looked embarrassed to be there, but none of them looked like they were lying. One of them, a man named Aaron Pike, handed Mercer the camera they had used that night. He explained that they had gone in hoping to film a short exploration video. Nothing more. No seance. No staged paranormal challenge. No fake audio. They entered through a broken side door, made their way through the west corridor, then into the east wing. That was where things started to feel wrong. Pike described the sensation carefully. It wasn't that he saw anything. It wasn't even that he heard anything unusual at the time. It was the pressure. Like the deeper they walked into the building, the more the air changed. Heavy, still, wrong. Another explorer said he kept feeling like someone was walking directly behind him. Every time he turned around, the corridor was empty. The third said he heard what sounded like metal, scraping far off in the building, but only once, and only for a second. Mercer asked the obvious question. Why did they leave after only 40 minutes? The men exchanged a glance. Then Pike answered. Because in the east wing, they reached a locked treatment room, and from the other side of the door, they heard something move. Pike said the sound behind the door was small at first, a light metallic scrape, then another, like something being dragged slowly across the floor. The three of them froze in the corridor and listened. None of them spoke. None of them moved. Then, from inside the locked room, came a single dull impact. Not loud, but solid enough to make all three step back at once. Pike said it sounded like someone had struck the door from the other side. They didn't stay to investigate. They backed away down the corridor, filming as they went. One of them kept looking over his shoulder, convinced something was following them through the dark. But when they ran the footage back later, nothing visible ever appeared behind them. No figure, no movement, nothing at all. Just an empty hallway. Mercer asked if any of them tried opening the door. Pike shook his head immediately. The handle hadn't moved, and even if it had, none of them were going inside. Jones asked whether the voice on the audio had come before or after that sound. Pike answered without hesitation. After. A few seconds after they turned away from the locked room. That detail changed the atmosphere completely. Mercer asked them to mark the exact location on the asylum floor plan. Pike pointed to the far end of the east wing. Second floor. Old treatment block. A section of the building that had been closed off, even before the asylum shut down. The three explorers refused to go back inside. They handed over the rest of their footage, gave their statements, and left before sunset. By the time Mercer and Jones reached the side entrance, the woods around the asylum had gone quiet. No traffic, no wind through the trees, just the low creak of the old building settling in the cold. Mercer pushed the broken door inward. The smell hit them immediately. Dust, damp plaster, old wood, and something else beneath it. Something stale and sour that had no business lingering in a building, left empty for decades. Their flashlight beams moved through the darkness. Peeling paint hung from the corridor walls in long curling strips. Wheelchair tracks had been worn into the floor years earlier, and then frozen in place, under layers of grime. Most of the glass in the interior windows had been smashed. Some of it still glittered across the floor. They began with the west corridor, the same path the explorers had taken when they entered. Jones activated one of the audio recorders and clipped it to her jacket. Mercer carried the EM meter in his left hand and his flashlight in the right. For the first 10 minutes, the asylum gave them nothing, only the ordinary sounds of abandoned places, water dripping somewhere deep in the walls, their own footsteps, the occasional groan of old pipes, expanding and settling with the drop in temperature. Then they reached the stairwell leading to the second floor, and both of them stopped. There, just above them in the darkness, something moved. Not a person, not a clear shape, just the sound of weight shifting across old floorboards. One step, then another, slow, measured. Mercer raised his flashlight and aimed it up through the stairwell. The beam cut across rusted railings and cracked plaster. Nothing else. The steps stopped. Jones looked at the recorder, light blinking on her jacket. Still running. Mercer called out once. No answer. They stood in silence for several seconds. Then, from the second floor, came a soft sound. Not a footstep this time. A woman crying. Faint. So faint it almost disappeared into the building around them. Jones turned toward the stairs immediately. You heard that? Mercer didn't answer. He was already climbing. The second floor was colder than the level below. Not by a little, by enough that both agents noticed it immediately. Their flashlight beams moved along a narrow corridor, lined with cracked doors and shattered observation windows. At the far end, a faded sign still clung to the wall. Treatment Ward, East. Most of the doors stood open. Inside, the rooms were almost empty. Rusting bed frames, overturned carts, metal cabinets hanging open. The air felt unnaturally still, as if the entire floor had been sealed for years. Jones kept glancing at the recorder clipped to her jacket. The red light was still blinking, steady. Mercer moved ahead, following the corridor toward the treatment block the explorers had marked on the floor plan. The crying had stopped. Now there was only silence. They passed one room where the wallpaper had peeled back in long strips, exposing dark stains beneath it. Another still contained an old restraint chair bolted to the floor. Leather straps hung from the arms, stiff with age. Neither of them commented on it. At the far end of the hall they found the door. Heavy, paint blistered and blackened with age. A narrow wired glass panel had been painted over from the inside years ago. This was the room the explorers had stopped outside. Mercer tested the handle. Locked. Jones aimed her flashlight at the lower half of the door. Fresh scratches ran across the paint. Thin, jagged marks near the latch, as though something metal had scraped there recently. Not years ago. Recently. Mercer crouched and examined the floor. A faint line of disturbed dust crossed the threshold from under the door, as if something inside had been dragged close to it and then pulled away again. Neither agent spoke for a moment. Then, from somewhere deeper in the east wing, came another sound, a soft, metallic scrape. Jones turned sharply toward the darkness behind them. It came again, slow, dragging, not from the locked room, from farther down the corridor. Mercer raised the EM meter. The screen had begun to flicker. The readings climbed, dipped, then spiked high enough to trigger the warning tone. Jones whispered for him to kill the sound. He muted it instantly. The metallic dragging stopped. The silence that followed felt worse. Jones unclipped the recorder from her jacket. Playback. Now. Mercer nodded. She rewound the last few minutes and held the speaker between them. At first, all they heard were their own footsteps and breathing. Then the floorboard sound from above. Then the moment they had both clearly heard the crying near the stairs. But on the recording, underneath that crying, there was something else. A second voice. Quieter, close to the microphone. Not crying, whispering. Jones replayed it. Once. Twice. On the third playback, the words became clear. Don't leave me here. Neither of them had heard that sentence inside the corridor. Not one word of it. Mercer looked up slowly, toward the darkness at the far end of the ward. The corridor ahead remained completely empty. Then a door somewhere down the hall slammed shut, hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Jones flinched and nearly dropped the recorder. Mercer swung his flashlight toward the sound. One of the doors halfway down the corridor, which had been standing open seconds earlier, was now closed. The corridor between them and it looked black enough to swallow the light. Jones stared at the recorder in her hand. The red light was still blinking, still capturing everything. Mercer took a breath, steadying himself. Then he started walking toward the closed door. Each step down the corridor seemed louder than it should have been. Old linoleum cracked softly beneath their boots. The flashlight beam shook slightly across the walls, catching flaking paint and rusted door plates as they moved. The closed door stood halfway down the hall on the left. Room 214, a patient room, according to the floor plan. Mercer stopped a few feet from it and listened. Nothing. No movement. No breathing. Just the low, distant creak of the building settling around them. Jones raised the recorder again. The EM meter in Mercer's hand had dropped, but not to normal. The numbers still drifted higher than they should have in an empty building. Mercer reached for the handle. It turned easily, He pushed the door open. The room beyond was small and almost bare. A rusted bed frame stood against one wall. An overturned bedside cabinet lay in the corner. Moonlight leaked through a broken section of boarding over the window, casting a pale strip across the floor. No person, no animal, nothing that could have closed the door. Joan swept her flashlight across the walls, then stopped. On the far side of the room, near the bed frame, were marks in the dust. Not footprints, not clear enough for that. But something had disturbed the layer of dust in a wide curved path, as though an object had been moved across the floor recently. Mercer crouched beside it. The dust was fresh enough that the edges of the marks had not yet softened. He looked back toward the corridor. No drafts, no broken hinge. Nothing explains the door. Jones didn't answer. She was staring at the recorder again. The audio levels had jumped. A thin hiss of static bled through the speaker, even though neither of them had touched playback. Mercer stood and moved closer. Without warning, the static cut out. A woman's voice came through the recorder. Low, shaking, very close. Please. Then silence. Jones froze. That hadn't been a playback. The recorder had captured it live. Mercer took the device from her and checked the screen. It was still recording. No file review, no rewind, no speaker glitch. The word had come through in real time, from somewhere inside the room. Both agents turned slowly, toward the far corner, near the bed frame. The flashlight beams settled there together. Empty walls, broken plaster, a strip of old medical curtain hanging limp from a bent ceiling track. Nothing else. Then something moved outside in the corridor. Fast. A dark shape passing the wired glass panel in the door. Too quick to identify. Joan spun and stepped into the hall, raising her flashlight. The beam cut through empty air. No one there. But farther down the east wing, one of the observation windows flashed with movement behind the broken glass. Not a full figure. Just the impression of someone crossing past the opening. Mercer came out behind her. The corridor had changed. It felt tighter now, smaller, as if the dark at the far end had thickened while they were inside the room. Then came the sound again, metal scraping across tile. Longer this time, dragging slowly from somewhere near the locked treatment room. Joan swallowed hard and spoke under her breath. It wants us back there. Mercer didn't disagree. They moved toward the end of the hall, slower now, keeping their lights fixed ahead. As they neared the treatment room, the temperature dropped again, cold enough that their breath began to fog faintly in front of them. The painted-over window in the locked door looked black under their flashlights. The scratches near the latch seemed deeper than before. And from the other side of the door, they heard it. Breathing. Slow. Wet. Deliberate. Not loud. Just enough to know something was standing on the other side, listening to them. Neither agent moved. The recorder in Mercer's hand continued blinking red. Then, from directly behind the locked door, a female voice whispered, "Don't let them take me back." Joan stepped backwards so quickly her heel struck the wall. Mercer stared at the door without speaking, because this time, the voice had not come through the recorder. They had both heard it with their own ears. Then the handle on the other side of the door began to rattle. The handle rattled once, then again, harder. Metal jerking against the lock from the other side with enough force to make the entire door shudder in its frame. Jones backed further down the corridor, her flashlight fixed on the handle. Mercer stood his ground for half a second longer, recorder in one hand, flashlight in the other. The breathing behind the door had stopped. Now there was only the sound of the handle, shaking violently in short, desperate bursts. Then everything went dark. Not just the corridor. their flashlights, the recorder display, the EM meter, all of it. 1 second the east wing was lit by white beams. The next it was swallowed whole. Jones cursed under her breath and hit the side of her flashlight. Nothing. Mercer did the same, still dead. The darkness around them felt immediate and total. No moonlight, no spill from downstairs, just black. Then, from somewhere very close in front of them, came a sharp impact against the locked door. The sound exploded down the corridor like a gunshot. Jones gasped. Mercer reached out blindly until his hand found her sleeve. They stayed completely still, and in the dark, something moved. Not running, not scraping, walking. Slow footsteps crossing the corridor in front of them. 1 step, then another, measured, heavy enough that the old floor complained beneath the weight. Jones whispered that she could hear it. Mercer tightened his grip on her arm and told her not to move. The footsteps stopped. Seconds passed. Neither of them breathed. Then a woman's voice spoke from somewhere in the dark. Not a whisper now. Closer. Clearer. Broken with pain. "Please. Don't leave me here." Jones made a sound she tried to swallow. Mercer yanked his flashlight again. This time it flickered weakly, then came back to life. The beam cut across the corridor. The locked treatment room door stood still, the handle no longer moving. The hallway in front of them was empty, but the door at the far end of the east wing, one that had been open when they first entered, was now slowly swinging shut, as if something had just passed through it. Jones got her flashlight working a second later. "Move," Mercer said. They did not approach the treatment room again. They turned and moved quickly back down the corridor, not running yet, but no longer investigating. The east wing felt alive now. Every doorway seemed to hold movement just beyond the beam. Every broken observation window looked like a face might appear behind it. As they reached the stairwell, something hit the wall behind them. A hard metallic clang. Jones looked back once. At the far end of the corridor, just outside the treatment room, a tall, dark shape stood motionless in the weak overlap of their lights. Too far to make out clearly. Too narrow to be furniture. Too still to be normal. Then one of the flashlights flickered again. For less than a second, the corridor went dim, and when the light returned, the shape was gone. That was enough. Mercer and Jones started down the stairs fast, not speaking, not stopping. The asylum groaned around them as if the whole structure were shifting in its sleep. Halfway to the first floor, Jones froze. From somewhere above them, back in the east wing, came the sound of a woman screaming. Not loud, not theatrical. A raw, choking scream, cut short almost as soon as it began. Mercer grabbed her arm and forced her to keep moving. They reached the side entrance in less than a minute and pushed out into the night air. The cold outside felt cleaner, safer. Behind them, the asylum stood silent beneath the trees. Dark windows, no movement, no sound. Nothing to suggest what had just happened inside. Neither of them spoke until they were back at the vehicle. Only then did Mercer look down at the recorder still clutched in his hand. The red recording light was on. It had never stopped. Mercer shut the vehicle door and locked it immediately. Only then did the two of them allow themselves to breathe properly. The asylum stood beyond the windscreen, half hidden by the trees, its upper windows black against the night sky. Jones checked her flashlight first. Full battery. No fault. Mercer checked the EM meter. The readings had already returned to normal. Neither piece of equipment showed any sign of failure, which made what had happened inside harder to explain. Mercer placed the recorder on the dashboard between them. For a few seconds, neither of them touched it. Then Jones said to play it from the point where the lights went out. Mercer rewound the file and pressed playback. At first, everything matched what they remembered. The whisper behind the treatment room door, the handle beginning to rattle. Then, the instant their equipment died, the recording changed, not to silence, to noise. A low distortion flooded the speaker, thick with static and interference, as if several signals had been forced together at once. Underneath it, they could hear themselves breathing in the dark. Jones whispering that she could hear footsteps. Mercer telling her not to move. Then the woman's voice, clearer on the recording than it had been in the corridor. "Please, don't leave me here." Jones stared through the windscreen at the asylum and said nothing. Mercer let the playback continue. There was the moment the flashlight came back on, the sound of them moving away, the metallic clang behind them. Then, near the stairwell, just before the scream they both remembered hearing above them, another voice appeared on the recorder, not the woman's. This one was lower, rough, male, so faint Mercer nearly missed it the first time. He rewound it, played it again. The words came through buried under the static. She tried to leave. Neither of them had heard that sentence inside the asylum, not a single word of it. Mercer replayed the section a third time. The voice was unmistakable, calm, close, and immediately after it, on the recording, came the woman's scream from above. Jones looked at him then, not frightened, just pale, because whatever they had encountered in the East Wing had not only spoken to them, it had been speaking around them, capturing things they were never meant to hear. The recorder reached the end of the file with a soft click. For several seconds, the inside of the vehicle remained completely silent. Then Jones asked the question neither of them wanted to answer. If that voice was on the recording, she stopped. Mercer finished it for her. Then it was there with us. They left the hillside less than 5 minutes later. Neither agent requested a second entry into the building that night. In the weeks that followed, the private anomaly research unit reviewed the explorer's original footage, Mercer and Jones's audio files, and the limited records that still existed for the asylum. No patient file matching the female voice could ever be confirmed. No living person was found to explain the recordings, and no official record could account for the locked treatment room in the East Wing having remained sealed for so many years. Local rumors continued, as they always had. Voices in the upper corridors, crying behind doors, sounds of movement in rooms that should have been empty. The asylum was later scheduled for demolition, but before contractors could begin work, a trespass report was filed by 2 surveyors sent to inspect the structure. Both men refused to re-enter the East Wing. Their statement contained only one detail of note. They claimed that while standing in the second-floor corridor, they heard a woman's voice behind a locked door, asking for help. After hours, transmission, Private Anomaly Research Unit, case file 004, location, St. Dymphna, asylum status unresolved.